Part 2. The Journey of Creation from Fantasy to Reality. Author, Get a Spark. Chapter 11. As for why Pangu opened the sky, in addition to Yuan Meng's local mythology, there is another point, which is what happened after Pangu opened the sky. This is of course not to say that Pangu transformed into all things, of course there are some reasons in this regard. But the more important thing is the treasures born after the opening of the sky, such as the Tai Chi diagram drawn by the fragments of Pangu's axe, Pangu banner, Chaos bell, and so on. The 12th grade creation green lotus, merit golden lotus, karma fire red lotus, and reincarnation black lotus transformed by the 36th grade chaos green lotus, and other things like Kunlun mirror, river map and Luoshu. In short, there are many treasures. Unlike other worlds, having one or two powerful treasures is already the best. As for opening up the world in the form of the Big Bang of the real world, there is no treasure at all. Yuan Meng is thinking that if one day this world evolves to a high enough level, can these powerful magic weapons be brought to the real world? At that time, he will have the Tai Chi diagram in his left hand, the Pangu banner in his right hand, the Chaos bell on his head, the merit golden lotus under his feet, and the Jotian star fighting array in the group battle, and the Zuxian sword array. In short, as long as he thinks about it, Yuan Meng can't help but laugh. Of course, these are still only in his imagination. After all, let's not talk about these, even the various strange phenomena in Yuan Meng's body, such as the Chaos Yuan Kai and the inner vision of the mind, sound quite high-end. But in fact, it is only limited to his body, and it can't work in reality at all, let alone these so-called magic weapons that are far inferior to the Chaos Yuan Kai in terms of level. After imagining the future, Yuan Meng's face straightened, and he stretched out his right hand to make a fist, and the surrounding Chaos ancestral chi immediately began to gather towards him crazily. In the end, the infinite Chaos ancestral chi turned into an ancient axe in his hand, which was firmly held in his hand. At Yuan Meng's feet, the same primordial energy of chaos gathered and turned into a chaotic green lotus emitting hazy light, which supported him and protected him firmly. Behind Yuan Meng's head, an ancient jade disk of creation also gathered endless primordial energy of chaos and manifested itself. As it slowly rotated, it had infinite light falling, weaving infinite principles and laws. Of course, those so-called principles and laws were all illusions based on Yuan Meng's cognition, his fantasy of the Great Way described in the legends of the prehistoric times and other novels. However, the so-called illusionary Great Way was only for reality, and for this chaotic space and the prehistoric world to be opened up. What Yuan Meng thought about was the real Great Way, with real power. And the three magic weapons condensed by Yuan Meng were naturally the chaos treasures used by Pangu to create the world in those prehistoric novels. When the three chaos treasures were formed, Yuan Meng did not hesitate and shouted loudly. He swung the axe of creation in his hand and chopped down the chaos in front of him fiercely. Shh, crack, crack, crack. Accompanied by the sound of a sharp blade breaking through the air and the crisp sound of glass breaking, the chaos space in front of him, which was filled with grey fog and chaotic chaos ancestral chi, was split into a small area by Yuan Meng's axe. Of course, it is a small area, that is also for the chaos space. In fact, this small area is also calculated in countless light years. It is a much larger space than the universe that humans can observe. And in the core position in the middle of this area, there is an endless void space. And the chaos ancestral chi that was broken, after a surge in this small area, turned into a piece of chaos aura. This is not the end. When the chaotic air poured into the empty space in the middle, it surged again. In the middle, it was split into two again by the remaining power of the axe of creation, and turned into two gases, one clear and one turbid. The light and clear air began to rise slowly, and in the process, it became more and more ethereal and invisible, forming an invisible sky. The heavy and turbid air began to slowly descend, but it became more and more thick and condensed, gradually evolving towards substance, and finally turned into a thick and heavy earth. Where do you say the distinction between up, down, left and right comes from in the chaos? Well, the place where Yuan Meng stood was the bottom, and the top of his head was the top. Between the two clear and turbid air, another space was generated, vast and boundless. From the outside, it only occupied a very small part of this chaotic air, but when you go inside, you will find the vastness of this space. Even if countless galaxies were put in, it would be like throwing a stone into the sea. Apart from splashing a circle of ripples on the spot, it would not have any impact on the entire sea. In the end, the space world opened up by Yuan Meng turned into a vast and boundless world. If calculated according to the real measurement unit, even if it is calculated in light years, it is probably impossible to calculate the size of the space. I am afraid that even if a galaxy is put in, it is just a speck of dust that falls into the sea and cannot even make a wave. However, in the vast world, there is no grass and no vitality, which can be said to be extremely desolate. However, this vast and desolate world opened up by Yuan Meng's axe did not want to close again like the legendary Pangu who opened up the sky, nor did he need to keep slashing to finally open it up completely. Just one axe chopped down, and it had already opened up such an infinite world, and this world was also extremely stable, and did not need him to support the world. After all, Yuan Meng was different from Pangu who opened up the world, because this chaotic space was born because of him. In this chaotic space, he possessed endless magical powers and endless mana. Not to mention just opening up such a world, as long as Yuan Meng wanted to, even if he opened up the entire chaotic space, it was also just a matter of an axe, or even just a thought. After opening up this vast and desolate world, Yuan Meng took a step forward and came into this world. He glanced at this desolate and dark world, raised the axe in his hand again, and swung it hard. In this world, yin and yang flowed, time and space were turbulent, and the whole world was split open by Yuan Meng again. Well, that's not right. It should be said that this newly formed primitive world was once again opened up by Yuan Meng, two worlds. That's right, Yuan Meng once again opened up two worlds, one yin and one yang. The two worlds complement each other, but at the same time they are attached to the primitive world. And with the primitive world, it formed a three-way balance of power, also complementing each other. The Journey of Creation from Fantasy to Reality. Author, Get a Spark. Chapter 12. Looking at the turbulent prehistoric time and space, Yuan Meng raised his hand lightly and threw out the axe of creation in his hand. Then, Yuan Meng smiled slightly and slowly stretched out his hand and pointed out. With his action, the axe of creation in the air shattered with a bang, turning into thousands of fragments and scattering throughout the prehistoric world. After the axe of creation was shattered, the four larger fragments turned into a scroll, on which the yin and yang flowed, turning into a golden bridge, covering the entire prehistoric world, and fixing the raging earth, water, fire, wind, and the chaotic yin and yang. A fragment turned into a chaotic bell surrounded by chaotic air. When it was gently shaken, there was a sound of dong-dong bell ringing, resounding throughout the prehistoric world, the infinite time and space, and fixing the trembling prehistoric time and space. Another fragment turned into a Pangu banner wrapped with chaotic energy. No, this world was not created by Pangu, and its ability is not exactly the same as the legendary Pangu banner. It should be called Yuan Meng banner. However, when Yuan Meng thought of this name, he shook his head. Yuan Meng banner is not nice at all. Well, let's call it Chaos banner. As the Chaos banner swayed gently, the chaotic energy raging between heaven and earth was attracted and gathered towards the Chaos banner. Under his transformation, it turned into infinite innate vitality. And as the Chaos banner swayed, it instantly appeared in every corner of the prehistoric world. This is completely different from the Pangu banner in the legend, which can release endless chaotic sword energy when it is gently shaken. The last larger fragment of the axe of creation, in a period of change, turned into a scroll with complicated and mysterious patterns engraved on it. Above the scroll, 4 long swords with murderous auras stood upright. On the 4 long swords, the 4 characters Zhu, Lu, Xian, Ju were engraved respectively. They were the 4 swords of Xuxian and the Xuxian formation diagram. Then the 4 swords of Xuxian shook lightly and turned into 4 sword lights. Under the traction of the Xuxian formation diagram, they merged into one in an instant and turned into a chaotic colored long sword surrounded by chaotic evil spirits. The Xuxian formation diagram turned into an ancient scabbard with the 2 characters Xuxian written on it, which bound the Xuxian sword, which was a combination of 4 swords, firmly in the scabbard without leaking any power. And the scabbard transformed by the Xuxian formation diagram was still constantly pulling, and the remaining Kaishan evil spirits between heaven and earth were constantly integrated into the Xuxian sword, enhancing the power of the Xuxian sword. Then Yuan Meng's mind moved, and the jade disk of creation, which was slowly rotating behind his head, appeared in front of him in an instant, and was divided into 3, turning into 3 crystal clear jade seals. The chaos green lotus under his feet, did not break, but flew out 4 lotus seeds directly, which turned into 4 lotus flowers of the 12 grades and flew into the prehistoric world. They were the creation green lotus, the merit golden lotus, the karma fire red lotus, and the reincarnation black lotus. The lotus stems, lotus leaves, and lotus roots of the chaos green lotus also broke away and flew to various places in the prehistoric world. Together with the fragments of the axe of creation, they turned into various spiritual treasures, each evolving, and a large formation of heaven and earth was formed, connecting the heaven and earth, and together stabilizing and suppressing the prehistoric world. At this time, the prehistoric world had completely stabilized except for the lack of life and the existence of the sun, moon, and stars, and could operate autonomously and orderly. And at this time, the entire prehistoric world shook slightly and began to rapidly evolve towards a higher dimensional world, and the chaos space was also undergoing the same evolution, and it had evolved in just one day and night. At this time, the primitive world, in terms of essence and level, has already surpassed the previous chaotic space and reached the level of the origin space. This means that Gu Yuan's success in opening up the world this time has made his entire chaotic space world evolve by 2 levels in succession. And after the primitive world was opened up, an invisible wave swept across the entire chaotic space, causing the chaotic space to slowly change. Groups of large and small chaotic ancestral chi entangled with each other and gathered into groups, slowly forcing open a space-time dimension, evolving into a chaotic space that was one space-time dimension lower than the current chaotic space and filled with chaotic chi. And in the core of these chaotic spaces, the chaotic chi surged and gathered, as if evolving and nurturing something inside. There was also a faint long river of time, which slowly derived from the depths of the primitive world and flowed through every corner of the primitive world. In Yuan Meng's world, the concept of time appeared for the first time, and it began to develop and evolve autonomously without the need for Yuan Meng's promotion. However, although the world has undergone earth-shaking changes, the prehistoric world and the chaotic space have evolved twice in succession. However, although the chaotic energy in Yuan Meng's real body has also undergone some mysterious changes, it has not changed its essential form, and its quality has not been improved. That is to say, the current chaotic energy is already at the same level as the innate energy of the prehistoric world after evolution. Yuan Meng carefully felt the chaotic energy in his real body and the various chaotic forces in his chaotic world, and fell into deep contemplation. It seems that the chaotic energy in the real body has not changed much from beginning to end, so-called from nothing to something, from invisible to visible, from substanceless to substance. In fact, it just adds various characteristics. In essence, it has always been the life energy it possesses. What it changes is just some attributes and characteristics of the energy. However, in terms of essence and energy level, it has not actually been greatly improved. In fact, it has always been on the same level as the life force in other people's bodies. However, other people cannot detect their own life force, but after this period of practice, I have been able to sense and control the force in my body to a certain extent. My years of practice have mainly improved the quality of the vitality in the chaotic space. The vitality in the real body is mainly endowed with various characteristics, and the attributes are also the same as the energy attributes in my own world. It's just a synchronous transformation taking place. There was no improvement in level or quality as I thought before. After a long time, after carefully comparing and thinking about the changes in his body's vitality and energy at various stages of cultivation, Yuan Meng finally came to an understanding and murmured to himself in a low voice. Well, it looks like I'm going to transform into heaven and earth too. Looking at the dark and desolate wilderness around him, Yuan Meng held his chin and thought for a moment, then chuckled and took a step forward to the center of the primitive world. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Journey of Creation from Fantasy to Reality. Author, Get a Spark. Chapter 13. When Yuan Meng stopped at the center of the prehistoric world, his figure immediately began to grow and expand. In the end, Yuan Meng's body became a giant with his feet on the ground and his head on the sky. Don't say how big Yuan Meng's body is, because it is immeasurably huge. Just the breath he exhaled lightly is as huge as a nebula. When Yuan Meng's body grew to the limit of heaven and earth, a huge amount of life essence began to escape immediately, spreading to the entire prehistoric world, evolving all things in the prehistoric world. And Yuan Meng's figure was also constantly changing, and finally turned into a sacred mountain that stood tall and tall, standing in the center of the prehistoric three realms. And the sacred mountain that Yuan Meng turned into does not exist in one realm, but exists in the prehistoric three realms at the same time. In other words, whether you are in the prehistoric world that was first opened up, or in the yin and yang realms that were opened up later, you can see this sacred mountain that stands tall, and you can touch and climb it. Moreover, what you see and touch in the yin and yang worlds are not projections, reflections, or clones. No matter which world you are in, what you can see and touch is the same sacred mountain. You can even communicate with the creatures of the other two worlds in this sacred mountain, but when you walk down the sacred mountain, you will still return to the original world and will not go to the other two worlds. The hair on Yuan Meng's body evolved into billions of galaxies, and began to slowly move according to their own trajectories in the endless void above the sacred mountain. Of course, this slowness is just a description, and in fact, its speed of movement is extremely fast. It's just that the endless void above the prehistoric world seems extremely slow, which is just because the space is too large and the distance is too far. Among the stars in the Zhoutian, there are 365 huge stars, even larger than a galaxy. And these 365 huge stars pull the infinite galaxy and move around it. Yuan Meng's eyes, which were larger than the galaxy, turned into the two stars of Taiyan and Sun in the prehistoric world, and quickly merged into the infinite galaxy above the prehistoric world, spreading the infinite light and heat of the Sun and the moonlight of the Moon to the three prehistoric worlds. And they were still moving slowly in a mysterious trajectory. At the same time, they also pulled the other 365 huge stars, with Taiyan, Sun, and the North Pole's Iway star in the middle sky as the core, and moved in a mysterious trajectory over and over again. This is the Zhoutian star array. When the Zhoutian star war was running, Taiyan and Sun would always alternately run to the prehistoric world at a certain time, bringing endless light to the prehistoric world and scattering endless moonlight. From then on, the prehistoric world had the rotation of the Sun and the Moon, and the distinction between day and night. Three more spiritual lights escaped from Yuan Meng's body and turned into three figures, respectively rolling up the Tai Chi diagram, the Chaos Banner, the sword of immortal execution, and the 3 jade seals, and each flew to the depths of the 3 realms. And the last piece of the Kaishan supreme treasure, the chaos bell, disappeared directly into the depths of the world after a bell sound. When the life essence of Yuan Meng's body permeated the entire prehistoric world, it immediately began to change the prehistoric world. Although no life was born yet, it seemed to be alive, full of vitality, and became much more agile. At this moment, the prehistoric world began to upgrade again. This is too fast, and I didn't do anything else. How did it upgrade again? Feeling the world start to upgrade again, Yuan Meng couldn't help but be a little dumbfounded. Well, so that's the case. However, Yuan Meng's mind was in harmony with the world, and he soon understood the reason. It was because Yuan Meng's world, after repeated evolutions, had reached a certain point and began to evolve towards reality. At this point, this world can already carry some information about reality. This is different from the various information about the avenues that Yuan Meng had imagined based on what he knew before. This is information about real rules. As for where the information about rules comes from, it is the body that Yuan Meng used to project and manifest when he opened the sky. Although it is just a projection, it is built completely according to his real body as a template. So, naturally, it will contain some information about real rules. Even if this is just a tiny bit of rules in the real world, it is enough for the completely illusory prehistoric world to advance. Well, so, I have to read more science books such as physics and chemistry in the future. Yuan Meng couldn't help shaking his head and smiling bitterly. He didn't expect that he was an old man in his 30s who had graduated for more than 10 years. Well, he is a middle-aged man, and now he has to devote himself to learning again. He hasn't touched a textbook for a long time. Not to mention those scientific books, such as physics and chemistry, he has never read them since he graduated. If you want to talk about the secret manuals of martial arts and metaphysical classics, he should be more familiar with them. Well, it seems that it is not impossible. Thinking of metaphysical classics, Yuan Meng's eyes lit up. Those metaphysics are also the ancients' understanding of the universe. And thinking of the chaotic energy in his body, the meridians and acupoints around his body, and the prehistoric world he opened up, Yuan Meng felt that it seemed that there was something to be done. Moreover, there was an opportunity to experiment now. Yuan Meng looked at the prehistoric starry sky with countless stars and the rotation of the sun and the moon. Carefully sensing the acupoints around his body, according to their own properties, they were projected one by one on the sky of the prehistoric world, and they were fused with the 365 huge stars one by one. And according to the acupoints around the body, the stars were adjusted more carefully in the direction of the body, so that they were more in line with the acupoints around the body. And when Yuan Meng had fine-tuned the integration of those stars according to their properties and directions. Without Yuan Meng's promotion, the Zhoutian star array immediately began to move slowly along the new trajectory, and an invisible force permeated the entire prehistoric world. The stability of the prehistoric world began to increase significantly again, and another promotion began. After the world upgrade was completed, Yuan Meng clearly felt the difference. The sky of the prehistoric world was higher, the earth was heavier, and the stability of the world was greatly increased, which could bear stronger power. At this time, whether it was the chaotic space, the chaotic ancestral chi in the chaotic space, or the origin space, and the origin ancestral chi in the origin space, they all underwent further transformation. It was the chaotic energy in Yuan Meng's body. I don't know if it was because of the suppression of the real world. When his world was evolving again and again, it only acquired the characteristics of being able to transform into other powers. And the power it can transform is the power that exists in the prehistoric world, such as the power of stars, the power of the moon and the sun, the power of yin and yang and the 5 elements, etc. However, at the fundamental level of energy, it has not been upgraded and is still at the original level. The Journey of Creation from Fantasy to Reality. Author, Get a Spark. Chapter 14. Chapter 572. At the same time, because of the chaotic energy at the beginning of all things, the characteristics of all laws and ways are derived. The energy of chaos can indeed breed the world, and to a certain extent, it is even more suitable than the void energy of the void world sea. Well, although what he said is not comprehensive, to a certain extent, it is true. After all, the so-called chaotic energy was originally derived from Yuan Meng's spiritual power and was used to open up and create the world. Moreover, most of its current levels are conceived and nurtured by countless worlds and countless sentient beings. Naturally, it has certain natural advantages in creating the world and evolving all things. Unlike the void energy of the void world sea, which is derived from the void sea and is extremely pure, it is just pure void energy. On the contrary, that world was born by chance. The power of the world and the energy of the void are not completely opposite, but they are almost the same. Although the world can also grow by swallowing void energy, this kind of swallowing is actually very difficult. It can only be swallowed bit by bit and transformed slowly. But swallowing the power of chaos is much easier. Often, every time the world is promoted, it will swallow immeasurable energy of chaos without causing any indigestion problems. However, even if the various characteristics of this chaotic energy are analyzed, it will not be of much help to the Lord of the Void and the current Sea of Void world. It can't clear away the energy of chaos. Although he can spend a certain amount of time using the rules of the Void world Sea that he controls to eliminate all the diffuse energy of chaos. However, that has no meaning at all, because as long as various conceptual information about chaos are still circulating, the energy of chaos will still be re-derived. It's not like he hasn't thought about tampering with the memories of countless sentient beings in all worlds to make them have previous concepts of chaos. However, even if he wanted to do this, he could only make those ordinary creatures and ordinary practitioners forget everything. As for the powerful ones above Lord Void, it is impossible for him to still silently tamper with their memories. In this way, the energy of chaos will inevitably emerge. What's more, I don't know since when, he was able to receive some information from the Void World Sea, which was information about the ancient world of Pangu and about chaos. Even later, there are all kinds of other information, Hung Jun's prehistoric world, Sanking's prehistoric world, Nuwa's prehistoric world, etc. Moreover, this kind of information can be easily accessed and analyzed by practitioners of any level. Even ordinary creatures in the world, those with higher spirituality, can receive some fragmented information. Faced with such a situation, even if he tampered with the memories of all sentient beings again, what would be the point? In desperation, the Lord of the Void could only change some of the rules of this Void World Sea, making the rules and environment of this Void World Sea closer to that of the world. Coupled with his deliberate actions, the endless energy of chaos was gradually expelled from this Void World Sea. And this is what the exploration team saw after they returned. However, because of this reason, a large amount of chaotic energy gathered together, which caused the Void World Sea outside this Void World Sea to begin to rapidly transform into a chaotic void environment. As of now, outside this Void World Sea, it is about to turn into real chaos. At this moment, from the perspective of the Void Lord, this Void World Sea is like an isolated island in the ocean of chaos, surrounded by sea water transformed from the energy of chaos. In fact, situations like what happened in this Void World Sea can be found everywhere in the entire Void World Sea. Because the conceptual information about chaos and Pangu was not just passed down by word of mouth. What's more important is that the information fluctuations spreading to the entire Void World Sea are constantly being analyzed and captured. This also leads to the fact that wherever there is a world and living beings, the energy of chaos begins to be generated. However, the chaotic energy outside those worlds is not as strong as this void world. From Yuan Meng's perspective, through his perception, the entire void world sea, all the areas where the information fluctuations spread, are starting to light up with little chaotic stars. The smoke-like chaotic energy began to spread outward little by little from these chaotic stars, with a tendency to submerge the entire void world sea. However, it would be okay if there was no void world where the Lord of the Void was located. With so many beings stepping into the void, it would be difficult to find where the energy of chaos is. And once they discovered it, it was already too late. As everyone discovers chaos, their understanding of chaos continues to deepen, which in turn causes the speed at which the energy of chaos is derived to continue to accelerate. But they have no way to stop it. They can only carry out passive defense, or build void force fields one by one to prevent the spread of chaos. However, their behavior cannot even be delayed nowadays. Only those void masters can construct special void rules, exclude those chaotic auras, and leave behind a series of void islands. However, as the saying goes, there is always a solution to any difficulty. Many void masters may not be able to completely wipe out the chaotic aura and prevent the spread of its information. However, they can also use their own means to open up a series of void islands, construct special void rules, and open up a series of void roads to connect these countless void islands. They began to communicate with each other, work together to fight against the invasion of chaos, and fight against and kill the chaotic demons and chaotic beasts that kept emerging from the chaos. To a certain extent, the spread of Yuan Meng's chaos has made these void masters, from the past solitary, begin to communicate with each other and exchange with each other. However, with Pango's reawakening and more world masters, they have become concept masters. They also began to spread information about their own concepts, which made the entire void world sea completely fall into the ocean of chaos, either independently deriving a certain concept of chaos, or mixing various concepts of chaos to derive a more violent and chaotic chaos. And this situation is still constantly strengthening with the passage of time. And the occurrence of this situation also began to reversely promote Yuan Meng's transformation. Finally, at a certain moment, Yuan Meng only felt his spirit lifted, and his mind and will began to rise instantly, and he could see a wider and wider range. In the end, Yuan Meng's certain perspective could even encompass the entire void world sea. Infinitely broad and endless. However, Yuan Meng was able to see the entire void world, which was extremely wonderful. At the same time, the entire void world sea began to derive chaotic energy. Facing the sudden appearance of the chaotic energy, most of the original creatures in the void world sea, including those void walkers, void venerables, and even the void lords and void overlords, were alert and tried to avoid it. Naturally, they all used various means to avoid the invasion of the chaotic energy. Logically speaking, with Yuan Meng's current realm, the chaotic energy derived from it can definitely erode and wear down their means in an instant, and completely submerge the entire void world sea. However, Yuan Meng did not do so. Instead, he preserved it, even the essence of the void world sea, and Yuan Meng did not erode or destroy it at all, so that the void and chaos coexisted in the void chaos state. It can be called chaotic void, or void chaos. The reason for this is naturally because Yuan Meng wants to find an equal opponent for the creatures in the chaos. Well, competition leads to greater progress. After countless years, two powerful forces that oppose each other have formed in the entire chaotic void. The native void creatures and worlds, and the chaotic creatures and worlds as invaders. That's right. For those void creatures and worlds, Yuan Meng's chaotic forces are the big villains as invaders and invaders. For a while, in those isolated islands of the void, there emerged countless heroic figures who fought against the chaotic forces. As for the Chaos Demon God and many world masters, they simply didn't know what to do. Chaos replaced the void world sea, which was the general trend. Why should they resist? Besides, there was no harm in integrating into the chaos. On the contrary, there were great benefits. There was an opportunity to make the ultimate leap and prove the concept of the master. It's a pity that in their view, Yuan Meng's chaotic forces were invaders, and they would never compromise. And Yuan Meng naturally saw this situation. At the same time, he was very satisfied with the situation he led. Even Pangu Hongjun and other concept masters could vaguely see some clues. This is also the reason why they never appeared in the chaos void after they became concept masters. However, Yuan Meng didn't care much about these, because all of them were in his palm, just a matter of thoughts. Yuan Meng stood at the highest point of chaos, looking at a certain place with a bright light in his eyes, and suddenly showed a brilliant smile. The whole book is finished. The Journey of Creation from Fantasy to Reality. Author, Get a Spark. Chapter 16. In the following days, Yuan Meng stopped practicing hard, but moved a recliner to the courtyard, and took out books from the study. He just lay on the recliner, basking in the warm sunshine, and read books leisurely. If he felt tired, he would just lie down, cover his face with a book, and fall asleep in the sunshine. And Yuan Meng also found that, as he thought, by acquiring knowledge of the real world, he could accelerate the evolution of the prehistoric world. However, perhaps it was because Yuan Meng did not understand the most subtle changes between substances in the real world. For example, a water molecule is composed of 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom. It can be said that most people now know this clearly. But specifically, what is a hydrogen atom like? What is an oxygen atom like? Why do they combine? Why is there gravity between substances? What exactly is gravity? What are these atoms made of? What are the even smaller protons, neutrons, and electrons like? Yuan Meng could understand these problems through books. But he didn't have a personal concept and experience of the more subtle ones. So this also led to the fact that the prehistoric world, although it had evolved several times due to various knowledge in the real world, became gradually perfect. However, it has always been superficial and has not produced any real qualitative changes. On the contrary, the metaphysical knowledge collected by Yuan Meng gave him a big surprise, allowing his prehistoric world to undergo a qualitative evolution. This is not to say that metaphysics is stronger than various scientific knowledge in the real world. Rather, science emphasizes materialism, which is the study and analysis of objective things and laws. Yuan Meng did not study this too deeply. Metaphysics is just the opposite. It is more about idealism. Metaphysical knowledge that is useless in the real world does not mean that it is also useless in other worlds, such as Yuan Meng's prehistoric world. Moreover, whether it is the degree of Yuan Meng's in-depth research on it or the compatibility between prehistoric and it, metaphysics should be more suitable for Yuan Meng's current prehistoric world. After all, Yuan Meng's primitive world was born from the depths of his soul, more like a spiritual world. Therefore, the metaphysical knowledge that is useless in the real world is more helpful to Yuan Meng's primitive world, causing a qualitative change in the primitive world. Even Yuan Meng's primitive world can slightly interfere with the real world. Yuan Meng gently tossed the stone in his hand up and down, his eyes were slightly blurred, and he was hesitant in his heart. Finally, Yuan Meng threw away the stone in his hand, scratched it on the ground again, and picked up a grain of sand on the ground. Aha! After thinking about it, Yuan Meng put down the sand in his hand again, and gently twisted it on the ground again. This time it was just a smaller dust. If it weren't for Yuan Meng's body that had evolved again and again, whether it was control or eyesight, it would be far beyond ordinary people, and it might not be possible to distinguish this tiny dust. This time Yuan Meng did not put it down again, but moved his mind, and the tiny dust in his hand immediately disappeared, and he had entered the primitive world. That's right, with the evolution of the prehistoric world, the time and space attributes were finally born, allowing Yuan Meng to control a trace of time and space in the real world. Although it was only a very tiny trace, It could also send some small things he touched into the prehistoric world. Of course, that's all. As for other things, such as breaking through space, teleporting, and even manipulating the flow of time, that was completely impossible. But even so, when he perceived all this, Yuan Meng was also very excited. He had read a lot of novels in his previous life about controlling a small world, collecting real matter, and finally evolving the heavens and the world. Especially after he opened up the prehistoric world and had some free time, Yuan Meng did not only study those sciences and those metaphysical knowledge. In his spare time, he also read a lot of novels about this world and some novels about opening up the evolutionary world, and he did draw a lot of inspiration from them. But Yuan Meng was still very careful and steady. Well, he was careful and steady, and he was definitely not a coward. At first, Yuan Meng did not collect items at random, but chose to test the smallest items. After all, the prehistoric world had just been born with the attributes of time and space, and was still very weak. Who knew what would happen when collecting items in reality? After collecting the dust, Yuan Meng's mind quickly sank into the prehistoric world. After entering the prehistoric world, Yuan Meng was immediately stunned by the scene in front of him. At this time, Tianzun, Hades, and Renhuang had all shown their figures, with the halo behind their heads shining brightly, and layers of infinite light emanating from their bodies. They tried their best to maintain the operation and stability of the prehistoric world with all their strength. Because in the center of the prehistoric world, a gray and infinite star suddenly appeared, floating in the void. This infinite star neither rose nor fell, and was completely unaffected by the gravity of the prehistoric world and the various rules of the prehistoric world. Instead, it exuded a terrifying gravity, attracting everything in the prehistoric world. Whether it is the continents and rivers in the world, or the sun, moon, and stars in the outer void of the world, they all left their original positions under the suction and flew towards the star. Even the time and space in the prehistoric world were violently twisted and broken under its gravity, and even the chaos outside the prehistoric world had begun to twist slightly. The first time Yuan Meng saw this star, he already understood the cause and effect. This star is not something else, but it is the dust he collected, but because his prehistoric world is too different from the level and dimension in the real world. So this dust, after entering the prehistoric world, became extremely huge, and its originally extremely weak gravity was directly enhanced countless times. The result is that the prehistoric world was destroyed by it. I think if it weren't for the efforts of Tianzun, Hades, and Renhuang to maintain it, I'm afraid that even if the chaotic space would not collapse and break completely, it would definitely become a mess. If the chaotic space is like this, let alone the prehistoric world, which is the first to be affected, it must have collapsed and shattered long ago, leaving nothing behind. Seeing this situation, Yuan Meng didn't say anything and immediately wanted to send it out of the prehistoric world. It's easy to invite a god, but it's very difficult to send a god away. As Yuan Meng's mind turned, the prehistoric world did produce a repulsive force, trying to repel the infinite star, that speck of dust. But the star just shook for a while, and then there was no movement. Seeing this scene, Yuan Meng's face changed suddenly. He had invited back a great man. If he couldn't send him away, he would be in big trouble. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Journey of Creation from Fantasy to Reality. Author, Get a Spark. Chapter 18. Even though hundreds of millions of years have passed, the prehistoric world is still the prehistoric world, still so silent and desolate, without a trace of life. This is not because Yuan Meng is unwilling to evolve other creatures in the prehistoric world. However, perhaps because the level of the prehistoric world is too low and the laws of the Great Road are not perfect, no living beings can be born in the prehistoric world. Even if Yuan Meng relied on the authority he held to evolve life in this primitive world, it was just a puppet transformed by his ability and could only act according to a fixed pattern, a plot NPC. Therefore, Yuan Meng gave up the idea of creating life, but let nature take its course and let the ancient world develop on its own. Yuan Meng believes that as the prehistoric world gradually improves, there will definitely be a day when life is born, and by then, the prehistoric world will definitely undergo another major transformation. Seeing that the prehistoric world had completely recovered, Yuan Meng finally felt relieved and returned to the real world again. In the days that followed, Yuan Meng returned to his usual routine of life, either reading a book or taking a nap on a recliner. While Yuan Meng was living a fulfilling and regular life, a secret experiment was also being conducted in a secret base. Is the power supply sufficient? Okay. No problem. The machine is working fine. The data is correct. Check it again one last time. The conductor of this experiment, an old white man with white hair, warned again with some worry. Okay. Normal. 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 Start up. After once again confirming that everything was normal, the white-haired old man in charge of the experiment finally issued the final start order. As the command is issued, buttons are pressed one by one, and rows of indicator lights light up one after another. Finally, in a sealed laboratory, there were more than a dozen machines that looked like large laser transmitters. At this time, the front ends of these machines lit up a blue light at the same time, turning into blue light pillars and shooting towards an open space in the center of the laboratory. More than a dozen blue light pillars collided together, erupting into a dazzling energy brilliance, and at their intersection, a basketball-sized energy light group was formed. And with the continuous input of energy, this ball of energy is still growing, and the energy brilliance it blooms is getting brighter and brighter. Normal. Normal. Everything is fine. Following the reports one after another, the white-haired old man finally felt a little relieved. However, as the energy light group grew larger and larger, when it reached about 1 meter, his heart became excited again, because the machines that were shooting blue energy beams began to shake slightly, with slight blue arcs dancing on them. Professor Max, the energy transmitter is overloaded. Do you want to temporarily stop this experiment? Looking at the constantly jumping blue arc, a staff member asked the white-haired old man in a low voice, that is, Professor Max. Asshole. It was almost, just almost. Professor Max murmured unwillingly, clenched his fist and slammed it on the workbench in front of him, and a trace of blood immediately oozed out. But Professor Max seemed to have no feeling at all. He just stared at the blue energy light group through the thick bulletproof glass of the laboratory, ignoring the dazzling blue light. At the same time, there is a parallel world that has no intertwining with the Blue Star universe. The ALS world has also developed a brilliant technological civilization, but although their technology is advanced, it is only developing in the direction of powerful weapons for individual soldiers and life assistance. As for weapons of large-scale destruction, they have not been developed because it is meaningless. They have never explored the starry sky. It is not that they cannot, but they dare not, because the starry sky is the domain of God. Mortals cannot look up at the starry sky, but can look directly at God. Gods of all sizes are entrenched in the starry sky. Occasionally looking down at the living planet below, they will give birth to a large number of strange beings, evil spirit creatures, and families of evil gods. The reason for this is naturally not because of the gaze of those gods, but more importantly, the gods themselves are twisted, absurd and weird evil gods, exuding the aura of pollution anytime and anywhere. Whether you look at them or be looked at by them, you will be polluted. If you cannot cleanse your body and mind by the spiritual light in a short period of time, you will be completely corrupted and become a weird existence. And those who are strong-willed and able to withstand the evil god's initial gaze will mostly become the evil god's dependents. At this time, The evil gods entrenched in the starry sky suddenly looked towards somewhere in the void and uttered strange and incomprehensible murmurs. Another different world is approaching. Following the weird murmurs, the endless power of the evil gods swarmed towards the void and attacked the world barrier. They have done things like this countless times, sometimes successfully breaking through the world barrier, sometimes not. And those worlds that have been penetrated by the world barrier are often contaminated by evil gods, evil objects, weird and wanton, and eventually the evil gods rob part of the original power of the world. However, whether it succeeds or not, the two worlds will eventually cross each other and break the connection with each other. Although it is theoretically possible to completely anchor one world, it is almost impossible in reality. At least in the past countless years, many evil gods have penetrated many barriers of other worlds. However, they have never completely anchored one world and completely fixed the connection between them. While these evil gods were attacking the world barriers, Professor Max on the Blue Star was about to issue an order to stop the experiment and abandon the experiment when something strange happened. The energy light ball that was expanding suddenly stopped expanding as if something absorbed the energy and began to shrink rapidly. And at the core of the energy light ball, a small hole was formed. The hole was not big, about the size of a thumb. However, Professor Max, who had been staring at the light ball, still found clues in the dazzling light. At this moment, Professor Max, who was ready to give up, suddenly shrank his pupils, and then he was happy in his heart and shouted to the staff beside him. Quick! Quick! Increase the energy input quickly. Ah! The staff beside him was obviously stunned by this sudden change. Asshole! Why are you still standing there? Why don't you do it quickly? Get out of the way. Let me do it. Seeing the staff stunned, Professor Max couldn't help but roar loudly, and finally pushed the staff away and operated it himself. As Professor Max continued to increase the energy input, the machine, which was already vibrating slightly. Immediately, it began to vibrate violently, and dense blue arcs jumped and wrapped around it, with bursts of crackling and crackling sounds. But this overload operation is also effective. The blue energy beams became more than twice as thick in an instant, and directly hit the core of the energy beams, the shrinking energy light ball. The Journey of Creation from Fantasy to Reality. Author, Get a Spark. Chapter 19. After receiving energy replenishment, the energy ball began to expand rapidly. In the blink of an eye, it expanded to about 1 meter. At this time, the situation of the light ball was already clearly visible. Empty, empty, empty space wormhole, success, success, I succeeded. Looking at the hole in the middle of the light ball, Professor Max's lips trembled with excitement, and he trembled and muttered to himself, obviously very excited. At this time, the hole was extremely dark, just like the deepest night. However, Professor Max did not feel anything wrong, but was extremely happy. After all, his research for decades was finally successful today. And at this moment, without anyone noticing, a cold, strange and evil breath, ignoring the terrifying energy and the terrifying high temperature contained in it, permeated from it. In just a few breaths, it has spread to the entire experimental base. There was an invisible wave, with the hole as the center, spreading rapidly, passing through the laboratory, passing through mountains and rivers, passing through cities and villages, passing through deserts and oceans, spreading across the entire blue planet, and even spreading to the universe. At this moment, both the staff and Professor Max shivered involuntarily. Hey, why is it so cold all of a sudden? Well, yes. And did you hear any sound? For a moment, everyone couldn't help but whisper. Even Professor Max looked around suspiciously, and he seemed to have heard some sounds. But he looked around, and after finding nothing, he put it behind his mind and stopped thinking about it. Just as everyone was discussing, they saw that the machine, which was already on the verge of collapse, finally couldn't hold on any longer. In a creaking and clicking sound, it was completely destroyed by the high-intensity energy and stopped working. The energy beam that was shot out immediately went out, and the expanding hole in the middle collapsed and shrank instantly, and disappeared completely in the blink of an eye. The deep cold breath that permeated from it also gradually dissipated because it lost its source, and the temperature of the laboratory was also rising rapidly. Only a few remaining arcs on the machine were left, still occasionally flashing and jumping, and wisps of green smoke rose from the machine. In Qingping Mountain, Yuan Meng held a book to cover his cheek, lying on a recliner, basking in the warm sunshine, and swinging his legs leisurely. Bang! Suddenly a dull sound sounded in the void, and Yuan Meng stood up suddenly in shock, ignoring the book that fell to the ground, and looked around vigilantly. Ordinary sounds would naturally not surprise Yuan Meng, but this sound was different. This sound was like it was directly ringing in his ears, which naturally shocked him. You have to know that after all these years of practice, although he did not have all kinds of extraordinary powers in reality, the only power to control space was still unable to be used normally. After all, a speck of dust can form an almost immortal star in the prehistoric world. If he puts an apple or even other larger objects into it, you can imagine the consequences. However, despite this, Yuan Meng's current body has reached the current limit of the human body. Now there is something that can come to him silently and make a sound in his ear, which will naturally cause him to be shocked and alert. However, no matter how Yuan Meng searched, he did not find anything. He relaxed his mind a little, slowly bent down to pick up the books that fell on the ground, waved his hand to shake off the dust on it, and sat back on the recliner. Only then did he carefully think about the dull sound. After thinking about it carefully, Yuan Meng found the difference. It seemed that the sound did not sound in his ears, but sounded in his heart, or rather, he sensed it. Yuan Meng looked at the sky thoughtfully. He always felt that something unusual had happened in this world, and he felt that this world seemed to have become a little different. He was a little confused about what had changed, so he could only shake his head and give up thinking. No matter what happened in this world, there would naturally be a tall man to support it, and it would not affect him for the time being. And if there was any change in this world, it would show up one day in the future. He could only let it go and see what happened, and then make a decision. What Yuan Meng had to do now was to read more books, acquire more knowledge, and improve the road of the prehistoric world in order to go further. It would be best if he could let his real body enter the prehistoric world, which would be perfect. Thinking of this, Yuan Meng did not take a lunch break, but directly opened the book in his hand and studied it carefully. Time passed quickly, and several months passed quickly. The world was still the same world, and nothing unexpected happened, so Yuan Meng put the matter behind him. The sunset is so beautiful, but it is almost dusk. I just hope that the night will never come. Looking at the afterglow of the sunset again, Yuan Meng sighed. Well, with a lifespan of 150 years, Yuan Meng is now less than 40 years old. Well, it really feels like he is moaning for nothing. But Yuan Meng didn't feel at all that he was moaning for nothing. He had experienced omnipotence in the prehistoric world, looked down at the changes in the world, and ignored the eternity of the passage of time. In the prehistoric world, countless millions of years have passed for just one nap. What does this mere lifespan of more than 100 years count? After watching the sunset and the last ray of light being swallowed up by the darkness, Yuan Meng walked back to the room calmly, preparing to go back to sleep and rest. Well, by the way, he could experience the feeling of seeing something for thousands of years. After lying on the bed for an unknown amount of time, Yuan Meng felt a cold wind blowing through the room, making his whole body tremble. Yuan Meng's mind, which was sitting in the chaos outside the ancient world and watching the evolution of the ancient world in boredom, felt this change in an instant, and his mind instantly exited the ancient world and returned to the real body. Yuan Meng's mind was tense, and he carefully felt the changes in the outside world. He remembered clearly that the doors and windows of his room were tightly closed. How could there be a cold wind blowing? Although we are at the foot of the mountain late at night, in this late summer and early autumn, it is still unbearably hot. Of course, that is for ordinary people. However, even Yuan Meng's body, which has been continuously adjusted and strengthened by chaos Yuan Qi, has reached the current limit of the human body, and can feel the slightest warmth. Therefore, he just put a layer of cool quilt on his body. But at this time, Yuan Meng no longer felt the warmth of summer, only the cold wind blowing, as if the hot summer had suddenly arrived in late autumn. At a certain moment, Yuan Meng felt chills all over his body, and he suddenly became alert. Yuan Meng felt as if there was some unknown danger that was approaching him. The Journey of Creation from Fantasy to Reality. Author, Get a Spark. Chapter 20. Chapter 20 The Great Underworld, A Glimmer of Hope. When the crisis was approaching, Yuan Meng instinctively opened his eyes and looked in front of the bed, only to see a hazy white figure standing quietly in front of his bed. Seeing Yuan Meng looking at it, the white figure suddenly pounced on Yuan Meng. Caught off guard, Yuan Meng just instinctively waved his palm, hoping to repel it. But the hazy white figure, like a phantom, passed through his palm without hindrance and pounced on him. No, it should be pounced into his body. When the hazy white figure entered Yuan Meng's body, it rushed towards his mind. For this, Yuan Meng, who could see inside, naturally had a clear view. In this moment, Yuan Meng's mind was full of thoughts, thinking of various possibilities, and finally settled on one idea. Soul. Ghost. This white figure that entered his body and rushed towards his mind should be the soul in the legend, or the ghost. Entering his body, there are only a few situations: killing himself, devouring the soul. There is also killing himself, devouring the soul, possessing and rebirth, or taking over the body. For all these situations, Yuan Meng's mind was instantly full of thoughts. He could feel that whether it was the blood power in his body, the chaotic energy that permeated his body from the Danshan, or the star energy that flowed through the acupoints and meridians of his body, it could easily defeat it. But perhaps it was because Yuan Meng habitually tempered and restrained all his strength to the extreme to exercise his control. As a result, the power in his body, without his own orders, actually allowed the white figure to enter his body, still doing its own thing, without the slightest intention of counterattack. This made Yuan Meng really not know whether to cry or laugh 3 times to the sky, praising his control over his own power. Of course, the greater possibility is that this white figure will not cause any harm to himself, that is to say, the power contained in this white figure has not reached a certain warning line, so it did not cause a reaction of his own power. However, no matter what, it is better to avoid a situation like today. After all, no one knows whether there are people who can restrain the energy breath as thoroughly as Yuan Meng. At that time, if it enters Yuan Meng's body without causing a reaction of his physical strength, the consequences may make him regret it. So Yuan Meng decided that in normal times, he would hand over the control of his own power to his instinctive subconsciousness, and only when practicing fighting, he would control it by his main consciousness. In this way, things like today can be avoided. This is because the body's instinctive subconsciousness will instinctively reject these external forces and naturally counterattack them. The main consciousness is different because it reacts autonomously according to the specific situation. Just like fire, humans, like other animals, instinctively fear and stay away from it. However, the ancestors of humans overcame their instinctive fear of fire and learned to use fire. It was because humans knew how to overcome their instinctive desires that they gradually became what they are today. However, this is not all beneficial. Just like today, Yuan Meng just subconsciously wanted to wave his hand to block it, but never thought about mobilizing the energy in his body, because he knew clearly that the power in his body could not act on the outside. It was not until this white figure entered his body that Yuan Meng sensed a different situation from his body's instinctive feedback. Yuan Meng could clearly sense that the energy in his body could cause damage to this white figure. If his body instinctively controlled these energies, I am afraid that the moment this figure entered his body, the power in his body would have automatically counterattacked, repelled it, or killed and defeated it. But that is all for the future. What Yuan Meng has to consider now is how to deal with this white figure now. Yuan Meng just thought about it a little bit, and then he thought about how to deal with it. As soon as he thought about it, the white figure that was close to Yuan Meng's mind immediately disappeared and was transferred to the prehistoric world. Yuan Meng's mind and will also entered with it. He didn't want to make such a big fuss in the prehistoric world like last time, and he had to go back in time, erase that period of history, and reshape the prehistoric world. When Yuan Meng appeared again, he had already arrived in the prehistoric world. The vast land was boundless, and a big sun was hanging high above the head. The cold sunlight spread all over the world, bringing endless light to the world. This cold sunlight is not a wrong word, because this is the underworld of the prehistoric world. It's just that here, except that the sun is not as hot as the human world and the heaven, and the air is filled with a cold and dark atmosphere, it actually looks almost the same as the normal world. It is not like the underworld in other legends, which is always gloomy and dark, or even has blood moons and blood suns shining on the earth. That is to say, the soul that enters the prehistoric underworld is just like entering another normal world to live. There is no big difference from the world before his death. He can still live normally and even practice, but he just changed the environment. Of course, this is only the prehistoric underworld opened up by Yuan Meng. The underworlds of other worlds in the chaos will be as gloomy and dark as the legend. And the prehistoric underworld opened up by Yuan Meng is not something that every soul can enter. In his imagination, it must be at least like the existence above the legendary golden immortal, after it has completely fallen and its soul has been scattered. Only then will the prehistoric underworld lead an immortal spiritual light to descend into the prehistoric underworld, and with the help of the power of the prehistoric underworld, the soul will be recondensed, but this process will be very long. It is even possible that before the soul is completely condensed, it has been sent to reincarnation by the rules of the prehistoric underworld. At that time, it is almost impossible to retrieve the memory of the previous life. However, they finally got a glimmer of hope. It depends on whether they can grasp it, completely condense their souls, and reawaken their memories. As for ordinary people, they also have a glimmer of hope. That is, after their souls are completely scattered, they also have a little bit of the most core original spiritual light, which will be attracted by the prehistoric underworld. It's just that this little original spiritual light of ordinary people will enter reincarnation and be reborn under the reincarnation rules of the prehistoric underworld the moment they descend on the prehistoric underworld. It is almost impossible to stay in the prehistoric underworld, let alone gather the energy of heaven and earth and condense the soul again. Of course, nothing is absolute. There are always two special cases and lucky people who break the common sense and stay in the prehistoric underworld and then condense the soul. And this is the glimmer of hope for all living beings. As for whether they can grasp it and whether they have the luck to grasp it, it depends on personal opportunities. Of course, this is just Yuan Meng's vision of the future. There are no living beings in the prehistoric and even chaotic worlds now, who need to reincarnate through the prehistoric underworld. As for what the future will be like, it still depends on the future and the specific situation. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Journey of Creation from Fantasy to Reality. Author, Get a Spark. Chapter 21. In the prehistoric underworld, except for the cold sun hanging high in the sky, the vast and desolate endless land, and the sky supporting sacred mountain in the center of the world. There is also an extremely huge white figure with a height of hundreds of millions of miles, wandering around in confusion on this boundless continent of the underworld. On the top of Buzhu Mountain, 4 figures stood on it, looking down at the blank white figure below. These were naturally Yuan Meng and his 3 incarnations, Tianzun, Human Emperor, and Hades Emperor. I have to say that our world is really low level. The outside world is just a small ghost, but here it is hundreds of millions of miles tall. Looking at the huge white ghost below, Emperor Hades said with emotion. Yes. Yuan Meng nodded in agreement, then paused slightly before speaking. So, let's destroy it and analyze the rules it contains. The current prehistoric world is not suitable for things in the real world to appear. Whether it is other items or this little ghost, it is the same. Good. Okay. Since it's a ghost, let me do it. After listening to Yuan Meng's words, the 3 Tianzuns also nodded in agreement, and Emperor Hades even took over the task of destroying this ghost and analyzing the rules it contained. After all, Emperor Hades originally ruled the end of the world and was in charge of the reincarnation of all things, so it was perfect for him to deal with this ghost. After finishing speaking, Emperor Hades took a step forward without waiting for anyone else to speak, spanning the distance of endless space, and appeared directly in front of the white ghost. Perhaps feeling the aura of Emperor Hades, the white ghost looked towards him instinctively. I saw the divine ring blooming behind the head of the underworld emperor, spreading infinite brilliance throughout the universe. The dark jade-colored seal of the underworld emperor on the top of his head, holding a simple sword in his hand, was looking at it with an indifferent expression. Although the divine light surrounding Hades fell on the white ghost, it did not cause any harm to it. However, the white ghost still felt fear instinctively, as if the face in front of him, whose face could not be seen clearly, was no more than an ant-sized villain, could obliterate him at any time. As for the suppression and restraint of the underworld emperor on the ghosts, they do not exist. Otherwise, the divine light surrounding Hades Emperor would not have any effect on the white ghost. Without him, in the final analysis, the prehistoric world was only created by Gu Yuan, and everything in it was just divided according to his wishes. The various rules of the Great Road are just fantasy manifestations combined with Yuan Meng's memories. As for the power it contains, there is none at all. Just recently, a trace of space-time rules was born, and there was the ability to incorporate some items from the outside world into the prehistoric world. As for the rest, it is just a dream, an illusory illusion. The ancient world opened up by Yuan Meng seems vast and boundless, but in fact, compared to the real world, it is not even a semi-finished product. Therefore, although Emperor Hades controls the reincarnation of all things, he has no real deterrent ability against the ghosts and ghosts from the real world. The reason why the white ghost is afraid of the underworld emperor is simply because the underworld emperor really has the ability to destroy it. And because the white ghost is, in the final analysis, just a ball of pure spiritual power, it is more sensitive to the outside world. That's why the white ghost is afraid of Emperor Hades. Emperor Hades looked indifferently at the shrinking white ghost in front of him, unmoved at all, and gently threw the long sword in his arms. After the long sword flew out, it unsheathed itself with a clang sound in mid-air. Then the scabbard changed and turned into a square diagram, and in a scroll, the white ghost was included in it. The long sword split into 4 parts, and the 4 directions of the formation were the Xuxian 4 swords and the Xuxian sword formation. The seal of the Underworld Emperor above the head of the Underworld Emperor was also under the control of the Underworld Emperor. It flew above the white ghost and released an unparalleled suppressive power to suppress it firmly. The so-called lion fighting a rabbit also means using all your strength. Although Emperor Hades is confident that he can easily kill it, this white ghost comes from the real world after all. Compared with the level of the prehistoric world, it is much higher level, so it is better to be careful. The most important thing is that killing it is not the purpose. The main purpose of the Hades Emperor is to analyze the rules contained in it to complete the rules of the ancient underworld. And this was their first time, so to be on the safe side, Emperor Hades directly used all his methods to solve the problem at once. What's more, this is the first ghost Yuan Meng has seen since traveling through time. Although he has heard of some supernatural events happening in such and such a place before. But it turned out that it was not a real supernatural event, but some special natural phenomena or some false legends. Some are even artificially created, just to attract people's attention, and then obtain some kind of benefit from them. That's why Emperor Hades is so solemn. Who knows how long it will take to encounter such a ghost next time if he misses this time. The ghost who sensed the change, although he did not have any clear intelligence, still had the instinct to survive, and immediately began to struggle crazily, causing the entire Xuanhuan sword formation to shake. However, as the Xuanhuan sword formation gradually started to operate, the Xuanhuan sword formation, which had been shaking, was quickly stabilized. As for why the Xuanhuan sword formation could really work, it was naturally because this world originally belonged to Yuan Meng's spiritual evolution, and it was easy to make his wishes come true. He said that if there was a Xuanhuan sword formation in this world, then this world would naturally have a Xuanhuan sword formation, and in the prehistoric world, it had its due power, but it could not act on real things. The Hades seal above the white ghost released a dark light, enveloping it and firmly binding it in place. Moreover, the dark light released by the Hades seal was still constantly penetrating into the body of the white ghost, constantly observing and analyzing the composition of the white ghost, as well as its body structure and existence form. With the continuous penetration of the white ghost's body, the Hades Emperor's understanding of the composition and existence of the ghost's body was also constantly deepening. At the same time, the white ghost seemed to be in great pain and struggled more violently. Even its body was twisted and piercing. There were faint sharp sounds. Could it be that this thing still had this feeling? Listening to the sharp sound, the Hades frowned from time to time, but he did not stop the action of his hands, and continued to analyze the body structure of the white ghost. Finally, the Hades stretched out his hand and lightly touched the void in front of him. A little spiritual light emerged and was twisted into a strange pattern by his control. There was also a trace of mental power integrated into it, wrapping it into a mental power light ball. The Journey of Creation from Fantasy to Reality. Author, Get a Spark. Chapter 22. Chapter 22 Analysis is successful, integrated into the rules. Why is there no reaction? The Hades frowned slightly, and could not help but use his divine thoughts to integrate into the Hades seal again. With the dark light in the Hades seal, he carefully scanned the body of the white ghost, which caused the white ghost to wail again. There is no difference. It feels like there should be nothing wrong. Does it have to take the shape of this ghost before it can work? The Hades murmured in a puzzled voice. At the same time, he subconsciously controlled the spiritual force light ball in front of him and transformed it into the shape of the white ghost. But even so, there was no change that the Hades imagined, which made him extremely puzzled and didn't understand what went wrong. In fact, it was not only the Hades who was thinking about this problem, but Yuan Meng, Tianzun, and Renhuang were also thinking about this problem. Logically speaking, the Hades Emperor has done it to perfection. Even if he can't form a ghost, there should be some changes, right? Yuan Meng touched his chin with his right hand and thought to himself. Could it only react in the outside world? Pa! Suddenly, Yuan Meng made a fist with his right hand and gently touched the palm of his left hand, making a crisp sound, which attracted the attention of Tianzun and Renhuang, and they turned their heads to look at him. However, Yuan Meng ignored them, but also pointed at the void in front of him. A little spiritual light emerged, twisted, and transformed into a strange symbol, and after he injected a trace of mental power, it turned into a mental power light ball. In the final analysis, the Hades Emperor is a profile incarnation of Yuan Meng. Yuan Meng can naturally use the knowledge and power he possesses perfectly. As Yuan Meng moved, an inexplicable change immediately occurred in the void in front of him, and a trace of dark breath was generated, gathering towards the mental power light ball. Finally, at a certain moment, the spiritual force light ball paused slightly, produced a trace of spiritual fluctuations, began to grow and change autonomously, and finally, twisted and changed to form another identical white ghost. It's done. Looking at this white ghost that was billions of miles tall, Yuan Meng couldn't help but smile slightly. After the formation of this white ghost that was billions of miles tall, it first looked around blankly, and then looked at Yuan Meng. Then, it was as if it had seen something horrible, and it kneeled on the ground instinctively, and kowtowed repeatedly in fear. This is because it was born because of Yuan Meng, and whether it lived or died, it was all in Yuan Meng's mind. And as a native creature in the prehistoric world, even if it constituted its origin, it was a trace of pure spiritual power separated from Yuan Meng. In this prehistoric world, it is also considered to be of high essence and deep roots. However, when facing Yuan Meng, the origin and creator of this world, it still seemed extremely small. It did not collapse completely at the first time. Yuan Meng had deliberately restrained his power. Although the ghost felt a little friendly because of that trace of spiritual power and the fact that Yuan Meng was the creator, it was more terrified and awed. So that's it? Tianzun and Renhuang witnessed the formation of this white ghost, and they couldn't help but reveal an expression of sudden enlightenment. Then Tianzun and Renhuang also created a ghost in the same way. In other places, the Hades Emperor also created a ghost, and then he waved his sleeves, and the four swords in the Xuxian sword formation shook slightly. Immediately, there were sword chi generated, strangling the white ghost trapped in the Xuxian sword formation. In just a moment, the white ghost was completely strangled, turned into soul fragments all over the sky, and dissipated between heaven and earth. Well, although it is said that to strangle a ghost, the Xuxian sword formation must be used, which makes the Xuxian sword formation seem really inferior. But if you think about it carefully, you will not think so. In fact, according to the current level of the Xuxian sword formation, it is not much stronger than the ghost. It can only be said that whether it is the Xuxian sword formation, the Hades, Yuan Meng, and others, or even the prehistoric world, they are still too weak now. That white ghost, although weak. However, in this prehistoric world, its essence is even stronger than the prehistoric world. It was only by relying on the manipulation of the Hades Emperor, with the extremely strong power turned into sword energy to crush it, that it was easily defeated. Of course, there are also reasons for different rules. That white ghost contains the rules of the real world, which is far beyond the rules of the prehistoric world. After all, the so-called rules and avenues of the prehistoric world, except for time, space, mind, energy, etc., a few rules, the rest are all from Yuan Meng's fantasy. It is the same as creating ghosts. Why did the Hades fail to create ghosts at the beginning? It was not because his method was wrong, but because they fell into a thinking error. That is, the real world is two worlds after all, so some of the rules are naturally different. The same rule pattern can form ghosts in the real world. But in the prehistoric world, it has no effect at all. This is like 1 + 1 = 2, which is a well-known universal law in the real world. However, if it were another world, this rule would not necessarily apply. Perhaps it would be 1 + 1 = 3, or 4, or 5. After all, the meaning of the number represented by 1, 2, 3 is only given by humans. In other worlds, this may not be the case. The rules in different worlds cannot be exactly the same, and it is this slight difference that causes that rule pattern to have no effect in the prehistoric world. Well, although the difference in rules is a bit exaggerated in the prehistoric world, after all, the prehistoric world is mostly some fantasy and illusory roads and rules. It is precisely because the prehistoric world does not have such a rule that the rule rune will naturally not work. If a person does not even have the concept of 1 plus 1 equals 2, if you ask him what 1 plus 1 equals, isn't that asking a blind man? And Yuan Meng was able to succeed because he thought of this, so he changed the rules of the void around him. In other words, Yuan Meng integrated the rules analyzed in the white ghost into the void around him and recognized the existence and function of this rule. Therefore, within the scope of that void, that kind of rule can take effect, and he finally created a ghost of the same kind. This is equivalent to someone telling you the concept of 1 plus 1 equals 2, so you can naturally get the result of 2. And the success of Tianzan, Renhuang, and Hades Emperor later naturally used the same method. Now that the reason is known, the next thing is easy to handle. Yuan Meng just moved his mind and added the rules about ghosts to the prehistoric world. Of course, it was added, but there are no living creatures in the prehistoric world. Naturally, except for the 4 ghosts created by Yuan Meng and the other 4, it is impossible for other ghosts to be born in a short time. After adding the rules about ghosts, the prehistoric underworld immediately became a little colder and more suitable for ghosts to survive. Thanks to the book Friend Ji Shi Kong Ju Du Wu Shi Xiang Si ran for the 100 rewards.